Hello, everybody, and welcome to another exciting episode of Meet, Act, and Part. And we're your hosts. I'm Greg Knott.
I'm Darin Laners.
And I'm Bill Hostler.
And I'm Todd Creason.
And we are excited to have you all join us again on this podcast adventure we put together. And tonight we have a very special guest, but he's also a very good friend of all of us. And he is the editor-in-chief of the Midnight Freemasons blog, and I think one of the pioneers in Masonic social media, and that is our good friend and brother, Robert Johnson. Robert, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on the show. This is an incredible honor, considering I'm among so many guys that really, I mean, you guys started the Midnight Freemasons. I just try to keep it going and keeping it fresh. So thanks so much. This is great.
Well, what we thought we'd do tonight is talk, your Masonic bios all over the place, so we won't get too deep into that. But you have been a big influence for me to keep motivated in Masonry. And, when I listened to all your podcasts, I listened to the Masonic Roundtable. It's funny, when we used to have scouts, I think you were on Tuesday nights, and we'd have scouts. And I know my son, when he was young, he'd always say, "Oh, Dad, you're going to go in there and listen to those guys again, aren't you?" After we got home from his meeting. And I said, "You bet I am." And so, one of the things we were kicking around before you even got on here was, how do you sustain the energy to do 50 podcasts of Whence Came You and most of the episodes of Masonic Roundtable? You have consistently done and made sure we have 150 articles or so every year on the Midnight Freemasons. All of us have been with you on some of the other little side projects like Masonic Radio and some of those things. But where do you find the energy and the drive to keep going?
Man, I didn't really think about all of that stuff in the way you just put it. I think the energy is still that I'm just excited about Freemasonry, like all the time. When I first joined, there was Todd's written about this a lot, and I think it's a really big part of it. And it's the fact that as a younger Freemason, not younger man, but like as a younger Freemason, I came in and I was really enthusiastic about Freemasonry. And then also, I was born in 1981, and the first time I got a computer, my mom said, "Don't take it apart." And I really wanted to play this game, Chuck Yeager's Air Combat, and I needed a remote control to do it. I needed like a game controller. And so I went to a place called Electronics Boutique. So hats off to anybody who remembers those joints. And I bought a game card, and I had a dream on how to install it. A dream. And I opened up my computer, and it looked exactly like the dream. And I plugged it in, and it worked. And so I've always been a communications person. I've always been into just going for it and just doing it. And then, so the electronics world, there's like a giant vacuum in Freemasonry, and we weren't doing a whole lot. And that's kind of an issue for many people. It's not just millennials. It's not just Gen Xers. It's not boomers. It's just people in general gravitate toward technology to make lives easier and communicate. And there was a big vacuum there. And as Todd's pointed out, give them a job and we'll do it. And my lodge gave me a job, and I was like, "Oh, neat." And I just went for it. The energy just comes from just always being excited and continuing to read what people in the fraternity are doing now. Like when I read Todd's blog, or when I read something from the Millennial Freemason, Nick Johnson, out in Minnesota. He's not real active anymore, but all these people consistently are putting things out, and maybe they're not consistent, but they've created content that sits there, and then I discover it, and then I get energized by it all the time, right? So it's just this big feeding frenzy of influence and energy that it just kind of tap into. Yeah, just staying excited about it all the time. And I mean, how many times do you go out, right, and you go to a lodge and you feel better? Maybe without Freemasonry, I'm kind of boring. So maybe this is something that I just dig into because you feed off of the positive energy, I guess.
Robert, I was so stoked about having you on the program tonight. I've been looking forward to this all week. I wanted to tell you that You came along in my life about the time I needed some energy. You know, when my energy was beginning to flag on the Midnight Freemasons is about the time that I ran into you. And your enthusiasm not only remotivated me, but dragged a bunch of these other guys into it again as well. So that's to be commended. But what I wanted you to talk about a little bit is where'd you get the idea for the Whence Came You podcast, and where do you get all that material from?
I came up with Whence Came You as kind of a tech junkie. You know, my grandfather was never the kind of guy who let his VCR blink 12 a.m. He was always on the forefront of technology. He always had to have a computer. He always had this stuff. And I grew up with my grandfather in the house, so I was always real techie. I'm an early adopter. What they say. I had mini disc. Even though 6 months after it came out, MP3s came out and killed the Sony mini disc. So as an early adopter, I was really into technology. I went looking for Freemasonry on the internet. And I said, well, I know there's so much stuff that we're not supposed to talk about, but what we can talk about, there's got to be something to consume. And I had a lot of alone time at my job because I worked at an airport. I was an OSHA specialist, and I would just be listening to podcasts all the time. And I said, well, is there one on Freemasonry? And it turns out there were a few, but they were dead. They come out and then they have a certain number of episodes, or it falls off after a period of time. So you're left with syndicated radio. So I came across this one. It was called The Digital Freemason, and it was a guy named Scott Blaskin. And he is, for all the world to know, yes, there were probably people doing Masonic podcasts. Somebody may have done it before him, but he was the first guy to create a consistent show that he read short Masonic research papers, not much commentary on it, but he was just really cool, had a great voice, and he's still out there, and he still keeps all of those episodes up. He just doesn't do it anymore. And he's the kind of guy who inspired me. I listened to his show, and then I sent him an email, and I said, Scott, I don't know if you're ever going to get this, but I want to do a podcast similar to yours, but in no way step on your toes. I just want to read some probably longer papers, because his whole thing was short Masonic papers. Each episode was 10, 15 minutes. And then I did one episode, and just maybe a few weeks later, maybe a month or two after I started, Scott had put up on his blog, it's been great. And I was always like, oh my gosh, did he get mad at me and quit or something? And years later we connected. And no, it was just, he felt like there had been some significant advances in technology and people were out there doing similar things. And he was like, great, I've passed the baton kind of thing. Maybe not to me, but to other folks. So as far as source material, that gets tricky. Of course, at the Midnight Freemasons, we always have this kind of share what you want as long as you attribute it back to the original author. And not every publication is that cool and that open. So on occasion, I will read from publications that are really, really old because there's no copyright, or there's no copyright holder, or you read from something that isn't quote unquote owned and controlled. For instance, Manly P. Hall has a magazine called The All-Seeing Eye that was never sold. It says right on the cover, not for sale. It's just given. So in accordance with his wish, you can read that. You could reprint them. You could hand them out as long as you're not charging for them. And just things like that. Lots of huge repositories. There's, of course, the Masonic Philosophical Society. There's, a million blogs out there. And so I'll just write the owner of a blog and say, hey, can I read this piece? One of the things I'm working on right now is trying to get permission to read 2 articles, one from the LA Times right after Manly P. Hall died. And because I wanted to do an episode on Manly P. Hall, actually. And the other one is from Variety Magazine. And they published something on Manly P. Hall several years after he died. And I've been going back and forth trying to get the okay to read those on the air. But generally, they're really cool. I read something from ancienttimes.net or something. He's got a whole magazine. And he was like, he had to send me this big paragraph that said, I, so-and-so, give Robert Johnson permission to read this on his show this one time, and yada, yada. It's really legal. But for the most part, we're going out and we're just asking people if there's a blog and say, hey, we'd love to read this. I did get my hand slapped one time. I think I read a piece from the Plumb Line, and the episode went live, and the next morning I had emailed them asking for permission, and I got nothing. And then after it went live, then they called me up and they said, hey, you can't do that. I was like, okay, I'll take it down. So I did, and I had to re-record something real fast. But I always try to do my due diligence to put it out there with just the caveat that this is like a philanthropic endeavor, right? Like Freemasonry education. And we want to assist people in getting, we don't want to be all their fulfillment, but you want to give them something when they don't have anything to do or they're looking for a little something extra. So hopefully that's where we get most of the content.
Bill?
The one thing about Whence Came You I like is it's never the same. You've really done all different kinds of things. I mean, Frater, you've had him on and doing things. One week he'll be talking about esotericism. The next week it's about Masonic history. I can remember that one time there was you did an old radio show, where it had, what was that? Was that a Whence Came You episode? Was that the name of that radio show? Do you remember back years ago?
Yeah, that was, there was it was actually an episode called Whence Came You, and it was an old radio program produced out of New York City. The guy who wrote it was an old radio play, and I think we split it up into 3 episodes, and it was this great story about a guy who went to Egypt as a reporter and meets a beautiful, stunning woman, and she's real mysterious. And she's in the background, but he keeps making eye contact. Or first, in the lobby of the hotel, then, he's at a restaurant, or then he's at the market, and he keeps seeing her. And then finally he goes out to a dig site, and they discover a tomb, and it's Cleopatra's tomb. And there's this portrait on the wall, and he looks at it, and it's her. It's this really, really cool, just old time radio thing. And that kind of spawned the whole idea for Masonic Radio Theater, which you and I, Bill, worked on for, probably a year and a half.
It's tough because we can either never come up with the time, the people, or the stories to do them. But, you've done so much and so varied content on that show over the last, 6-7 years now? Do you have anything that you'd like to do in the future that you haven't tried with them, with Whence Came You? Or is there anything that you have plans in the future to do that you'd like to try? Or what do you think is the future for your podcast?
So the podcast, the first couple of years that we did it was all out of pocket. So I was paying all this money for web hosting, for the website. And, as a Freemason, there's no funding for anything. So it's easier to do something for really cheap than it is to wait month to month for reimbursements, because that's how we operate, right? So I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this, but if I can do it for free, I'll do it. But of course, there's no real great way to do it for free. So what we did was I said, well, I'm going to do the best job I can do with the funding that I have. And so I was able to always kick in some money and make it happen. And then we opened it up for people to be able to donate to the show. And it's not like, of course, I pay taxes on all that money that comes in, but really all that money that comes in is just reinvested in the show. So the more people donate to the program, we can expand content. Like I can have longer episodes. I can afford to pay for license-free music. Something that like the first people ask all the time, like you're not on Spotify. Why aren't you on Spotify? Well, the reason I'm not on Spotify is because I can't be on it. The first 50 or so episodes have some music issues where I need to basically cut the entire intro outro out of the program and put a new one in because the music is not license free. So those episodes, while up on YouTube, are blocked in some countries and things like that. So there's all these legals that go into it. But to answer your question, like what's in the future for Whence Came You, it's basically just I want to make it the best podcast it can be using every dollar that comes in for it and investing it into the program so that the people who produce the program and myself also, I put money in there too. It becomes premier podcast that it could be, like imagine in 10 more years, if we're still doing this, Bill, you wrote, people probably don't even know this, but Bill wrote an entire a Masonic TV channel on Roku, right? Like, it was the coolest thing. It all day long was syndicated different things. But like the dream, what if there was a Masonic channel that was streaming all the time? People are so fascinated by this Netflix series Tiger King now, right? And this guy blows up on the internet as a YouTube star. He's got a show that happens several times a day and people follow and all this stuff. What happened if a niche community like tigers? Like, there's probably more people, I think, there's probably more Masons that might tune into something, maybe. Maybe it's not as wide and varied as, say, wildlife and conservation and tigers and things, but there's nothing to stop us from doing something like that. The fraternity, I'm not saying it should go that far, but I think that there's room to continually grow into a medium that you could tune into whatever you want. But maybe podcasting is where it will continue to live. There's so many now. I think the Rocky Mountain Mason even just launched their first episode of a podcast, which is totally fantastic. I loved it. I didn't know Ben Williams had an accent until just 2 days ago.
The one thing about Tiger King, I mean, it was filmed like 15 miles from here, so I knew it was going to be a train wreck as soon as I heard about it. If you think about it, what was it, about 2-3 years ago, Channel 4 in England made that documentary, The Freemasons, about English Freemasonry. Look how the Masonic community went back crap over that. People that watched that Roku channel loved it. It's just that I tried to put out, I even put a GoFundMe, and, I didn't get a single dollar for it, and there was no way I could afford to do that on my own. I never have given up on that completely, but that would be great for the future. And who knows? Maybe we'll just make Masonic King. We'll, and make it some kind of thing with tigers. Maybe we'll get it in the future.
Masonic King would be absolutely fantastic. I laughed, because you talked about that Freemason show that happened, the Freemasons that was over in United Grand Lodge of England. And that got such mixed reviews here in the States, but largely people really enjoyed it. And I think people respond really well when some sort of really well done content comes forward. For instance, there was the Freemasonry Around the World, Terra Masonica, which was a really lengthy documentary film. People loved that. And then you've got this new guy, Johnny Royal. We had him on Whence Came You probably a year ago now, to talk about his first documentary, which was The Royal Art of Freemasonry. And then he did the movie about the Bavarian Illuminati, which was with Joe Wages, and that's called Illuminated. And what's fascinating is they had such great production value, and that's half the battle. And now what we're seeing is like areas of Freemasonry where there is money to be spent on things like PR and film and all of these things. They're seeing that when you spend the money, it creates, you're investing in your future, right? And then the return on your investment is a re-engagement of your constituency. So, for instance, we've seen such great things right now coming out of, say, the northern jurisdiction of the Scottish Rite, not only from their ad campaigns, Not Just a Man, but the creation of a website. I mean, the Midnight Freemasons for years had a thing on our website, said how to become a Freemason. Well, we just redirected that page now to go to beafreemason.org, because it's literally a better option than, sending it to us and then we're reaching out to Grand Lodges and connecting them. But when the northern jurisdictions out there now spending money and they're doing ads and they're doing live webcasts and they're meeting Freemasons where they're spending their time, which is a lot of time, electronically or, sitting in front of a screen, it just makes sense. And if you spend the money, the audience is there. We've seen it with the Freemasons documentary, the movies that have been made. It's great, in my opinion.
And Robert, I think you bring up a point I was going to ask you or reflect on. To me, you're not scared to try things. We're in a fraternity that's historically very conservative. I don't mean politically conservative necessarily, but we've always done it that way, so we don't try new things. I have seen you help lead the revolution, for lack of a better word, of some of the things you just listed off. I think what always impresses me about you is it's never about you. It's always about the craft. you've put in the yeoman's work to do a lot of these projects. I mean, I know that you do them, but I never get the feeling that it's about you. And, Darin and I came out to Alexandria and attended the 300th celebration of Freemasonry, and it was awesome. And, you guys took a big risk, probably fiscally and certainly personally, by putting that on. And it was just hugely successful. And you filled a void where Grand Lodges weren't stepping in that space. And I think all these things help leverage the momentum in a new way that's going to reform the fraternity in ways that I don't even know if we can fully envision yet. I gave up a long time ago on worrying about numbers. You do need enough members, of course, to have a nucleus, and John Rurick's done all his great work on the study of the numbers. I guess I look more to the future, even maybe beyond my life expectancy in it, and say, we're going to be a completely different organization in 10 years. We're a different organization than we are 11, 10 years ago when I came in. I think it's exciting, and I think some of the things you're doing are exciting, and I just want to applaud you for it. I still think about that 300th event and how in the world you guys pulled that off is just remarkable in my view.
Thank you so much. That it really does mean a lot, Greg. The 300 thing was so interesting because it's just like with anything in our regular life. We tend to have this like line in the sand that says, this is how we operate in this box, and this is how we operate in the Freemason box. And so many of the tools and things that we have in regular life, we seem to not have in the Freemasons box. And it's not for lack of we don't have them. It's like this perception that we're not allowed to use them. And we're not allowed to use them because we are administratively heavy. And there may be somebody who doesn't like somebody doesn't like Zoom. So they're going to say, you can't use Zoom anymore. But I think with in terms of like 300, that celebration that we held, we said to ourselves, hey, let's do something, you guys, and what can we do? And John and Jason from the Masonic Roundtable did a ton of work because we held it out in their neck of the woods to secure a location, and we actually met with the House of the Temple, and we met with the George Washington National Masonic Memorial, and we said, hey, this is what we want to do, and the memorial said, this is great. And no disrespect to the House of the Temple, we just didn't get anything back. Nobody talked to us about it until it was too late. And thank goodness we didn't do it at the House of the Temple, actually, because it was hot as heck, and they have no air conditioning. So we ended up doing it at the National Masonic Memorial. And the money was an issue, right? I mean, we literally rented out a national memorial for a private event. And what we did was we worked with the National Masonic Memorial, and they gave us a really good rate since it's a Masonic thing. And we made sure that we said, you should have your bookstore open because people are going to buy stuff there, and they did. And, at the end of the day, the Masonic Memorial was Mark Tabbert and Sean Iyer, both over there. Both were incredible partners to have and to help us put it all together. But it was so funny because while we kind of organized the event, everybody who was working was people who came. Like, we had people who showed up early bringing equipment in for us, and we're setting up all the AV. Everybody was working. It was a celebration for Freemasonry, while like the Masonic Roundtable guys put this thing together. All the attendees came, and we all worked together as a cohesive force to put something on. And when at the end of the night, when it was like when we toasted, it was a toast to everybody in that room, because everybody, the attendees, everybody paid money to come here, including us, and we all chipped in to make that happen. So it's a big group effort. I talked in the beginning, right, like about this shared energy. People feed off of the excitement, and that's just what happened. And it was a lot of fun to do.
Robert, tell us a little bit about the Chicago Masonic-Con that's coming up in September.
Woo! That's going to be another one. So the Masonic-Con Chicago was an idea. I kept seeing all of these posts, when we would share that Esoterics-Con in Virginia was coming up, or Masonic-Con in Attleboro, Massachusetts was coming up, and people said, when are we going to get it out here? And I kept talking to some folks, and I finally said, well, it's going to happen in our area when you do it. It doesn't take much. It's a lot of planning, and it's a little bit of stress, but let's be honest. It'll happen just from you deciding it's going to happen. And nobody was picking up that baton. I just kept seeing that same message. When's it coming? And so what we ended up doing was I do this thing where if something is pretty much like 80% planned in my head, it's 100% done. So I slapped down a yellow legal pad and I wrote down a bunch of web addresses and I said, who can I get to come to this thing? And I think I launched the website and I wrote emails to everybody I needed to come and talk at this thing in 24 hours and told everybody it was going to happen. And so that's going to happen. I worked with the temple board at my local lodge to rent the lodge from the Temple Corporation, and that'll be up in Libertyville, Illinois. And that kept any issues administratively because we're going to be open to the public. It is privately funded through WCY Media, which is my legal entity, so we don't have to deal with red tape, right? There's no tiled presentations, but we'll have some great Masons coming out. You're going to have Todd Creason. Todd, you're going to be there, hopefully, and we've got 10 other speakers also who will be there over the course of 3 days. It's a 3-day event. So Friday night will be a dinner together. Then we'll have all-day presentations on Saturday starting at 8 in the morning, go until about 5. We'll break for dinner. People can go out. There's 63 restaurants in Libertyville, Illinois, so people can go out, get something to eat, come back, and then we'll have a screening of a movie that evening. And stay up late talking about it with some panel guys, and then start again next morning, probably 8, 9 o'clock, and go till about noon, close out the session. But it's hopefully going to be really good. But I do have to address the pandemic that's going on, because I got a few emails and they said, with this pandemic going on, Attleboro Masonic-Con is rescheduled to end of August. What are the plans for September in Masonic-Con Chicago? And my response that I wrote in several emails, and I guess I'll say it here, is that at this time we have no plans on canceling or rescheduling or pushing out that particular convention. If it comes down to what we think is probably likely, maybe there'll be we'll of course have hand sanitizing and those things all over the place, because that'll probably still be a thing. We want people to kind of, I can't guarantee that, everything's going to be cleared up by then. But if they say we can't have the event because of this, we're still under lock and key orders. So in the event that we have to do that, then we will end up keeping those same dates, and we're going to have to move to a web-based version where everybody will have everything they need live on screen, and we'll have secure platforms. Everybody who buys a ticket will get their badge, name badges, all the perks and stuff via the U.S. mail. We'll be sending all that stuff out, and probably doing refunds on any portion of the ticket that would normally have been used for food, because obviously, unless we're going to mail you a Chicago-style hot dog, we'll have to call Portillo's. But yeah, it's going to be a great event, regardless of whichever way we have to do it. We may have to do a technology pivot, hopefully not, but I'm sure if that is the case, then we'll just make it work. But we're really excited to do it. We've got all of the people that I watched through my Masonic growth presenters. I've got Todd coming, I said. We've got John Ruark and Jason Richards, a couple guys from TMR. We've got Dago Rodriguez from the Southern California Research Lodge. He's the guy who does Fraternal Review. I've got Timothy Hogan coming out, who's been really gracious with his time. Several people that are coming. It's just gonna. I basically said, who can I get to come out that all these people love, that always continue to blow my mind anytime they have content. So that was kind of the impetus.
So Robert, Todd, Greg, and Bill, of the four of us, I am probably the one who's most heavily into esoterics. And one of the things that really fascinates me is a group of, I guess, a series of presentations you give that you call the Quantum Series. And I was just wondering if you could maybe give a, I won't say brief overview, but for our listeners that may not have the opportunity to hear any of these lectures, just a brief or an overview of some of the ideas that you present in those.
Sure. So the first talk that I ever really gave about esoterica was a talk on the Tetragrammaton, which is the lost word. It's this idea that the ineffable or unknowable, and it's like when somebody says, imagine nothing, and you can't, because you can't conceptualize that. This is the term ineffable. And so what we talk about in that presentation is the word, which is supposed to be, whether this is God's name or a word of a sort. And it started off as an AMD presentation for Allied Masonic Degrees. It was a paper that was published several years ago, I think in Miscellanea. And I ended up giving the lecture to the Pennsylvania Grand Lodge's education event, which is their Academy of Masonic Knowledge. I've always been fascinated since I was little. I grew up Roman Catholic, and then when we moved to Chicago, we were in California, and when we moved to Chicago, most of the Catholic schools were in Chicago proper, and so we were far north suburbs. So I had quite a different change when my mom put me in a Lutheran academy. The difference being, one is heavily mystic, right? Roman Catholicism has a very mystical element. And the Lutheran side, coming to that, keeps some of that mysticism, but also the library is insanely important. Understanding context, historical context. And so I started to study that stuff at a really young age before going to school for comparative religions. And I hit my minors in mathematics. So it was a real juxtapose. Like, I'm very science-y, but I'm also very into the ideas of religion itself. So I started researching a lot into historical context of original Hebrew sources for things like these words and the stories that are told. Like, when we read them in Hebrew, what do they mean? And I don't speak Hebrew, so I have to go through a few of my old professors and teachers to ask questions. But basically, this series of lectures, what it attempts to do is to look at religious concepts and take those concepts. Basically, it takes these concepts and compares them to what science tells us. So mathematics in particular, everybody seems to think that scientists hate religion and religion, religious people hate science. And maybe there's some middle ground or something. And it's, they're kind of centrist, but there's never a middle line that says they're the same thing. But I think what's interesting is if you look at I hate to use the term New Agey or to talk about spiritualism as a religion, because there's a lot of hokey stuff that happened with spiritualism as a religion, in the early part of the 20th century. But they had some really interesting goals with the more learned portion of spiritualism. And those goals are that religion and science, or philosophy and science, however you want to look at that, are the same thing, viewed through two different lenses. They both express the same problems and values one is through an allegory and historical events, and the other is through the idea of literal science. So that first one I did ended up being the second lecture. The Tetragrammaton, or the Lost Word, is actually the second part in the lecture series. The first part is called Esoterics 101. And what I cover is the idea that there are several different mystery schools outside of Freemasonry. Freemasonry is itself an esoteric organization by definition. And I'll talk a little bit about in that presentation the single red thread that goes through all of these other mystery schools and even in religions. And it's a similar thing that goes through all of them. And then so we start to expose the idea that philosophical concepts are exactly related to mathematical formulas. So it sounds really dry, but it's fun. And then the second portion in the Lost Word is it talks a lot about the idea that there's a line in Scripture, and the Word was with God, or we talk about in the Zohar, it says that loosely, God creates all things from the hard spark. And that might be the beginning of it all, right? Is this idea of the hard spark or the Big Bang, the explosive force of the universe? And so what if the hard spark that it talks about in the Zohar is the expansion? And what if a word is a vibration, a sound? And if you look at that scientifically, is that strings? As in string theory, the smallest elements outside the Bose-Higgs particle that we know about today. And then the third part is probably the most interesting in that it's called quantum entanglement and apotheosis. So quantum entanglement, I talk about, it's a mathematical, or in physics, really, I should probably add emergent theory to the description, but I talk about the idea that apotheosis, this idea, most people are familiar from Washington, D.C. They know about the apotheosis of Washington. So a man becoming deified or godlike. And so the idea is that you take that particular concept and then you look at some older concepts, things like Gnostic Christianity, where they talk about certain people who have mastered this kind of knowledge are able to return to the pleroma, which is the realm where the one exists. I'll say the one because I'm not sure if it's supposed to be, it's a loose concept. It's more like it might not be Jehovah. It might be something else. And so they return to the one, the source. And so then you think about this oneness and the things that Gnostic Christianity was talking about, and then you look at some of the spiritualism ideas that really were heavy in the early. So the idea that some of the New Age stuff that was happening, or the spiritualism in that early part of the 20th century, really talked about the idea of oneness. That Alan Watts has famously said this thing that it's like you are the universe experiencing itself, and that's kind of the idea in a lot of those early spiritualist ideas. It's that mathematically we're all the same thing, and that there are certain scientific concepts that prove, for instance, like life after death even. If I said the law of thermodynamics, a third law, that anything that's measurable or has mass can't be destroyed, right? It just changes form or shape. And so then if you can measure the human consciousness of the soul, you can't be lost with the body when the body ceases to exist. So there are these blending points within the esoteric umbrella, and underneath this there's a lot of stuff that's going on where people say things throughout. They'll buy these massive tomes that they'll read 300-400 pages, and then at the end of it, not really sure what they just read or what's going on. They're like, oh, I read this and I thought I was going to get this massive secret. But the secret is not so much something that you can read, right? It's experiential, but I think it does boil down to some things that are really easy to understand. Well, not easy to understand, but they're provable with science and physics. And that religion and philosophies tell us that they've been telling us for a long time in a different language of stories that these are concepts and they're real things. And now somehow through a different lens, right, the modern world says, oh, if I can't see it, I can't believe it. But the world of the spiritualist would say it's not seeing is believing, it's believing is seeing. And Schrodinger will agree with you. We know that's correct. Anybody who's interested can look up something like the double slit experiment, in which we know that physically viewing something changes the outcome mathematically. So there's an esoteric thread that runs through all of it, and it sounds really complicated, but it's kind of not. They flew me out to, there's a lodge in Southern California, and I said, well, yeah, what lecture do you want me to do? And they said, all three. I was like, that's like a long time. And they're like, yeah, we cleared the whole day. So I went out and I literally gave one lecture after another with a 10-minute break in between each one. And I lectured for 5.5 hours. And I just went through slides and was showing math formulas and all this stuff. And to an audience of maybe 20 guys. But it was, so it's not terribly difficult stuff. It's just trying to understand what some of our ritual is talking about. And not only our ritual, but many other schools also. So outside of Freemasonry, right, there's the Golden Dawn is very popular, Ordo Templi Orientis, whatever outside organization might be. Even, OTO, or not OTO, but Golden Dawn, that comes from Rosicrucianism, and the oldest Rosicrucianism organization, quote unquote, is a Masonic one. So these schools are born out of Masonic threads, and they explore these things, and I'm just taking them and adding those esoteric concepts, and I'm putting them together with hard math and science, saying this is legitimate, so you should pay attention to it. And if people want to say that they can't believe it unless it's a fact, a scientific fact, if Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't say it's real, it's not real. Well, there are philosophical and religious concepts that math proves, and they're real. So you should believe in those things. And one of them is, it's a continued existence and a creator. If emergent theory, for instance, tells us that nothing can exist without something having watched it come into existence. And if the Big Bang happened, what watched the Big Bang happen? It's a fundamental question. You'll get people who say, well, there are science people, atheists, who will argue with me that emergent theory isn't legitimate. They're like, oh, it's just a theory. Well, so is calculus, but you teach it. It is what it is. That's what that's about.
And Robert, what strikes me about the esoteric side, or Masonic-Con, or the 300 celebration, and what I find consistent in what you've done throughout all of these projects, is the fundamental concept of saying, you've heard the ritual, but do you understand it? Can you dig down a little bit, or as deep as you want, and try to understand what those words mean, and then how you can apply them? I think everybody on our podcast here tonight, we all know great ritualists, and there's some of them couldn't tell you from word go what those words mean. That's what I have found consistent with you, whether it's like even the Midnight Freemasons. It just doesn't matter. What you're doing is saying, let me challenge you in some way, you, the Freemason, to look at that ritual and start to understand what it means. And that's what so many men, when they knock at the door, were looking for anyway. And so I think these efforts, our podcast is just a microcosm of it, is designed to help people dig down and understand, do the research. I think most Freemasons are consumers. And when the lodge is over, even if you've had some 10, 15-minute education piece in the lodge, that's it. That's, they're not a student of it. I think when you go back, in my opinion, to the origins of Freemasonry, it was men that were challenging themselves to learn new things. And whether they become enlightened or not, it was their source of education to explore the world. And I think if you read and listen to our ritual, it's challenging you and telling you to do that. That to me is one of our obligations. I know all 5 of us do that obligation. We study it and all in different ways. But for me, that's what you're doing through all of these efforts we've talked about tonight, is saying, just take a few minutes and read it, study it, and go look at another source and ask another question. Because if you do, you'll learn something and you'll say, oh yeah, boy, I want to know more. To me, that's the road the fraternity's on. It's a long climb up that hill. And there'll be different levels to which we all, I think, want that education and that knowledge. But I am confident that's the track we're on. I just want to applaud you for all that you have done to get us going in that direction. And it wasn't you alone by any means. I know I don't imply that, but just your energy inspires others. And just even hearing some of the things you talked about, what Darin asked you about with that lecture series, that's just so intriguing to me to want to learn more. And so I just want to thank you. What we'll do is kind of wrap up here. Robert, again, I very much appreciate you being on, and I want to pass it on to my fellow hosts here to ask you any last questions and then have you wrap it up for us.
Yeah, thank you so much. In terms of what you said, people understanding ritual and whatnot, I guess from a long stance is I always, thought that would be part of the work as becoming a Freemason, is really understanding. I always thought it was weird that we just had to memorize it and we would move on. And they would say, well, you got the rest of your life to learn what it means, but we need to get you to memorize this right now, right? It hit me a few years later. We were always looking for a way to say something. And I think Todd Creason, you had put up a meme one time, and it said that Masonic education, forgive me, I'm going to paraphrase this, but basically you likened it to being a car mechanic. You said you can drive a car, but you don't know how it works. Masonic education is not, just driving the car, that you know how to drive the car. It would be like a mechanic knowing the ins and outs of a vehicle. And that always hit home for me. And I said, yeah, that's exactly what it's about for me, is understanding. Because while I might challenge somebody or like propose something, I'm not the expert. I'm just a person that reads a lot, and I've put some things together. And if somebody's got something better to say, that's what I'm all about, is perspective. I come back to this quote from the Master's Lectures, a book written from Evans Lodge here in Illinois back in 1920s. He said, trooping through the doors of our preparation rooms, we find an ever-increasing company composed of those from whose faces is missing the stamp of high intelligence, in whose eyes the torch of education has lighted no fires, and whose halting steps are led by friendly suggestion or quickened by the hope of gain. And I always thought about that thinking, man, that's really harsh. But there's a lot of people who don't ever want to dive into any of this. And I think that's what's lit a lot of fires. But by no means am I the person doing it. It's, I'm just pushing forward things that, when I found Todd's blog piece, when I searched Freemasons and beer, Todd had a great piece about George Washington's beer recipe. I mean, the information is there. It's about going out and finding it and like satisfying your curiosities. And I guess that takes a little bit of work for some folks.
I just have more of a statement. A few episodes back, we were trying to decide what makes the Midnight Freemasons so popular amongst the brethren. And it hit me a couple of weeks ago versus the old books, from the old times and then like 19th century. A lot of those guys, when they wrote books, Masonic books, they wrote for each other. But when one of us write a piece for the Midnight Freemasons, we're writing it for other Masons, just another guy like us. And I think that's why we're so popular. We write so other guys like us can understand. And we write for what the things that they want to hear. And I don't know how you do it sometimes dealing with us. It's got to be being the editor of this group of guys. It's got to be like herding cats. I mean, I know sometimes, on our own private back channel, you'll go up there and say, hey, don't have a piece for Wednesday. Did anybody got anything? And it's, you hear crickets, but somehow you've got something to fill that void. And I don't know how you do it. I really don't. And I mean, you've done it for 6-7 years now. I got to applaud you. Plus Masonic Radio Theater. Plus, I mean, good Lord, you even go on Masonic camping trips, for God's sake. I got to applaud you for your energy, for your stamina, and just for everything that you do, the Masonic Society. You don't get enough praise for what you do and keeping us going, and just for all the work that you do. And I just want to thank you. I mean, Todd did lay the groundwork with Midnight Freemasons, but you paved it and you made it the road that it is that we all are riding on right now.
That's man, I'm so humbled by all that. But like I said, it's a community effort in terms of putting up all these pieces and things. Here's what's up: is I know Todd puts up his own pieces, and they routinely get more hits than anything. And he's got his own editing source. I think he's got somebody who edits his stuff. I have to edit just a few of you guys, and it's not hard. It's not. I'm just reading, and that's, I guess, the pleasure is that's the plus side, is I get to read all this stuff, and it's so amazing. Not a piece that goes up on Midnight Freemasons that I haven't read. So sometimes I don't get to books. People are like, oh, have you read this yet? No. Why not? I don't know, because I'm reading 3 articles a week. But like, you got to give a huge shout out to Carolyn, Steve Harrison's wife, because I think she does some editing for him, right? So like, everybody shares the burden of editing and all of that. But like I said, the energy that comes from this stuff is just from working with top-notch talent, and the ability, the privilege of being in contact and working with you guys. I wouldn't be where I am today, and I mean this literally, I've gotten my feet in some hot water. And there's been some Masons, you guys listening to this, maybe you're on this show, know who you are, and have helped me out many a times with counsel and everything else. I wouldn't be here at all without those people.
Robert, I'd like to thank you also. Basically recap what Bill said. Not a lot of people know it, but if it weren't for you, the Midnight Freemasons would have been gone a long time ago, because I was getting ready to let it go when you took it over. So we all owe you a great debt of gratitude for stepping up and taking that over. And it is a lot of work, I know, because I did it for a long time. But the work that you do, as you and I have talked about before, it's not so much the writing, it's the people who are reading it that get something from it. I mean, I think that's the reward. But thank you very much for all that you've done for the fraternity and for the Midnight Freemasons and programs like this one. So thank you.
It's my honor, really.
And just to piggyback on Bill and Todd, RJ, you are a rock star. I mean, whether or not you choose to believe it, your passion, your energy, your voice is much not only needed but respected throughout the craft. Before I knew you, you were somewhat intimidating. And I say this because I remember being at a Grand Lodge and you were in the Starbucks and we actually passed each other and I knew who you were from the podcast. And I was about to say, you know, I love the podcast or whatever. And I'm like, but he's a Masonic celebrity. I'm just going to let him, you know, enjoy his coffee or whatever. But it's been for me, such an honor to not only know that I can pick up the phone and bounce ideas off of you, but to have you sometimes make my incoherent ramblings coherent. So I thank you for that. I thank you for being a brother. I thank you for being a friend. And I thank you for coming on here today. You know, I love you, man. I know many of us on here also love you, and keep up the good work. Thank you so much.
Oh, man. I love you guys too. I do have to say, Darin, your pieces that you've written are things that I have thought about often. When you started writing about Harry Potter, or when you start doing some stuff on the esoterics that happen, or veins of thought, philosophical stuff that comes through in pop culture, I love it. And speaking of, you guys should all check out Darin's piece he wrote in Fraternal Review. He just got published in Southern California Research Lodge's magazine. So congratulations, Darin. That's awesome.
Thank you. It's the first time I've been published, so I was pretty blown away. And then Dago sent me a hard copy of it, and I sent him a thank you note. I think it went out today, so hopefully he'll get that. And I didn't even honestly know until I saw his Facebook post, and just completely humbled by the experience.
Yeah, it's a great magazine, and you did a great job. I got to read it before it was published, and I was like, oh man, this is so cool. So yeah, it was awesome. Nice job.
RJ, thanks again. We're going to wrap up this episode of Meet, Act, and Part. We really appreciate you being on, especially appreciate all of our listeners. If you're not familiar with RJ's work, you can Google search Whence Came You podcast. I know it comes out about 9 or 9:30 on Sunday nights every week, or at least 50 weeks a year. Also on Thursday nights at 8:30 Central. I believe he's on the Masonic Roundtable with some other great guys. And again, my sincere thanks for being on, and we'll sure talk to you soon. And all of our listeners, make sure you tune in again soon for another exciting episode of Meet, Act, and Part.